everyone, my name is Sarah and it is the end of the decade. How did this happen? People have been talking a lot recently about where they were 10 years ago and where they are now and what they've achieved. 10 years ago, I was 11 years old, so I was still in primary school, living my best life, you know, coming home after school, watching afternoon TV, eating too many pieces of cheese on biscuits. Life was great. 10 years ago, I didn't even read that much. Like, I read books for school and I think it was like the Australian Premier's Reading Challenge. That was a thing. I did that occasionally, but in no means did I read as much as I do now. My life has changed so much in the last 10 years, like it's actually unbelievable. I went to high school, I went to uni, I finished a uni degree, I've written 8 books, I've read like 700 books, oh my god. I've been to 25 or so countries, I've seen thousands of movies, I've probably spent an entire year on the couch watching Netflix, so productive. But yeah, I've done a lot in the last 10 years and I'm pretty proud of myself. But in celebration of 2019 coming to an end, I thought it was time to do the end of the decade book tag. This book tag was created by Brews and Books and I was tagged by Kat from Stars and Embers and I'm really excited to do it. If you don't know, this specific book tag is broken into 3 parts and you talk about your reading habits in each part. So the first part is 2010 to 2013, then it's 2014 to 2016, then 2017 to 2019. So for me, that kind of looks like middle school, high school, and then university. First up, 2010 to 2013. Let's do this. Question number 1, how many books did you read? For these years, I probably read around 150 books. I definitely started reading a lot more in high school. I was a part of this writing group and my teacher was always like recommending new books to read, so I got a lot of recommendations from her. And in year 8, I discovered BookTube, so I started reading all of their recommendations as well. Even though I didn't keep account of my reading and I didn't know Goodreads was a thing back then, I still reckon I read maybe like 50 to 80 books a year, so I think that works out about right. I definitely read a lot more books towards the end of middle school because I started my book blog in year 9 in 2013. Oh my god, that feels like so long ago. Oh, wow. So of course when I started that, I was reading like 3 to 5 books a week and I was getting out like 2 to 3 posts every single week about the books I read. Wow. Back in the day when I was a consistent blogger. But that leads me on to question number 2, which is which genre did you read the most? Undoubtedly, dystopian was the biggest genre between the years of 2010 and 2013. I mean, I can name about 1 billion books off the top of my head that fits that category. I was obsessed with The Hunger Games and Divergent and Shatter Me. Oh my god, they were the greatest. I always look back on that time as being like the golden era of YA, and by no means was it perfect. It was very white and very straight and a lot of the stories were very much the same and there were no clear characters. But there's something just so wholesome about looking back on those days and remembering the time where I walked into the bookstore where I now work and picked up the second Hunger Games book, or when I was reading Divergent on the train on the way to school, and even when I read Allegiant in China and ended up throwing it out the window of a bus on the way home from the Great Wall of China. That was a time. Question number 3 is what were some of your favorite books or authors? I know I've mentioned some of these and a lot of them are going to be very familiar to you, but let's go through them. First one is City of Bones by my lovely queen Cassandra Clare. Oh my god, I love her so much. I remember discovering this series and then my friend was like, you should read Infertile Devices, and I was like, no way is it ever going to be as good as City of Bones. Oh my god, I hate my life. I love Jace. And then it was, of course, and now we've got the Dark Artifices and life is great. Then I have Vampire Academy, Rochelle Mead. Oh, throwback to the vampire days. I also loved Twilight and the House of Night series, but Vampire Academy definitely had a special place in my heart. Next up, Shatter Me. What is that cover doing? She never wore a dress like that, I'm pretty sure, so who knows, but this was a great book and I thought the author was genius for crossing out words in her book. It's still pretty cool, but looking back, this book is not as great as I once thought it was, which is kind of disappointing. Divergent, I was freaking obsessed with this series. I actually forced my German teacher in school to read this, and she loved them as much as I did, and once a week we'd meet up and have lunch together and talk about this book. Yeah, I wasn't very popular in high school. Then we have Hush Hush. Oh my god, my beautiful fallen angel patch. This series was trash and I was totally here for it. I remember hearing the news about a movie coming, and like 10 years on, I'm still waiting, so please hurry it up if it's happening. I would love to see it. And of course, The Hunger Games. How could I not mention this book? I still remember lining up outside of the cinema to see this movie for the very first time, and there was like one other person there, and I was severely disappointed because I thought it was gonna be like the biggest film ever. It was. Just there are no teenagers who live in my suburbs, so my friend and I were like the only two in the cinema apart from one other. It was great. I loved this series though. Question number 4 is a book that you wish you read during this period, and I know, but I wish I read Harry Potter. Oh, I waited so long to read this series. Oh my god, this is embarrassing. I was in first year uni when I finally read this series. I was just so young when these books first came out. I remember I was in year 6 when the last book came out, but I wasn't like massively into reading at that stage, and oh, I vividly remember sitting up in a tree with my friend in this park, and she was like, oh yeah, I read the book in the first day, and I was like, okay, tell me everything, like I'll never read it. Then she told me, and I was like, meh, okay, I'll still never read it. Like, I loved the films. I was freaking obsessed with the films. I still am, what am I saying? But I just never thought that I'd read the books because I'd already seen the films. And then I listened to Stephen Fry narrate them, and everything was right in the world. So yeah, I wish I read this book earlier, and I wish I freaking discovered a Harry Potter musical when it first came out, because I only watched that like 4 months ago and it's changed my life. Wow. And question number 5 is, do you have any regrets about your reading? I try not to live with regrets because I feel like that's kind of unhealthy, but I do regret reading Allegiant. A lot of you will already know this weird story about how I read Allegiant, but for those of you that don't know, long story short, I was on a school trip in China for 5 weeks when this book was released, and being obsessed with the first 2, I was desperate to get my hands on a copy, and we weren't allowed like phones or anything back then, so we had the desktop computers at school that we could use while we were in China. So I bought the ebook, I downloaded the PDF, and then I printed it out onto A4 paper. Yup. Then I went on to be environment captain for high school, so it's fine. But I had this stack of paper which was Allegiant, and every night I'd stay up with my iPod screen like lit up because we didn't have torches on it back then, and I would just be reading this book at like midnight while the room was completely dark. It was a great time. And then I got up to the famously bad part on my way home from the Great Wall of China, and I just tossed those few pages of the book out the window of a bus. Sorry, China. And then yeah, once I finished reading this book, I just left that massive stack of pages under my mattress at my school. So one day someone's gonna find this random book of Allegiant with like 4 pages missing, and they're gonna be like, what the hell? That was a great time, but also regrets. Next up is 2014 to 2016, which is my high school years, year 10 to year 12. So the first question is, how many books did you read during this time? I worked it out to be around 220 to 250. I definitely stepped up my reading game, and I was like so into vlogging during these years, and I just remember like reading on the way to school and at lunchtime and on the way home and in classes. There was never a time where I wasn't reading. Probably should have been reading my English books, but instead I was reading like John Green and stuff. Question number 2 is, which genre did you read the most? Undoubtedly contemporary. This is the time where I was utterly in love with contemporary. I wanted every cute contemp, I wanted every rom-com, an American teen high school story, and it was just the best. I read so many books that basically just have the same plot line. It's like a guy and a girl getting together and there's drama and it's a little bit funny, But oh my god, I loved these books. I probably really gravitated towards the contemporary genre during high school because high school was tough and I just wanted a space to relax where I could just fall into this cute fluffy story where I didn't really have to think too hard. Question number 3 is, which authors or books did you read during this time that you loved? Of course, the first one. I was obsessed with The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I know everyone was freaking obsessed with this book in high school, but it's so embarrassing. Like, I was determined to get a tattoo of an infinity symbol, and I even got the signed first edition of this book, and John Green was my hero, and I saw the film 6 times when it came out in cinema. And back then, I didn't even work at a cinema, so I paid to see it 6 times. I bought the DVD on Blu-ray so I could have all the special features. I bought the album to listen to the music. I did everything in my power to try and go on a trip to Amsterdam, but it's not my fault that I only had $50 in my bank account. Probably because I saw the movie so many times, I couldn't afford that trip. So yeah, was obsessed with this book. I also loved all the other cute contemps that I've basically forgotten about by now, but some standout ones were This Is What Happy Looks Like, Jennifer E. Smith. I loved her. I remember buying this book at Barnes & Noble in America because I freaking loved contemporaries. Morgan Matson, The Unexpected Everything. I loved her books. Another cute contemporary. These books are still great. Like, I'd reread them now. They are phenomenal books. Yep, the next one. Lola and the Boy Next Door, Stephanie Perkins. Great series. Very trash, but fun. And finally, My Life Next Door, Huntley Fitzpatrick. As if these books couldn't get any more similar, we have Lola and the Boy Next Door and My Life Next Door, and they're both about guys and girls getting together in high school. It was fun. The next question is, are there any books you wish you could have read in this time period? And there are so many books I wish I could have read. I was just so focused on these cute contemporaries that were getting all the media hype that I didn't even know that there were some more diverse and queer releases coming out. And I really could have used some of them. I was just reading stories all about straight couples and I was really kind of struggling with determining who I was during that time, and I reckon reading a lot more queer books really could have helped with that. Just like fun, cute books that were like the books I was reading but more queer. Like, they would have been great. Like These Witches Don't Burn, which I read this year. This was such a fun book and there's a bit of magic in it and the characters are queer and it was just wonderful. If I could have read that book back in the day, maybe that would have made me feel less alone. Another book I would have loved to have read is The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy, which is also about this strong, badass woman kind of taking control of her life and determining who she is, and I loved that. I would have loved to read that in high school. And finally, another book that I hold really dearly to me is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. Not only is this an amazingly queer book, but it's also about the pressures that you put on yourself in high school and the pressures to get into university and basically killing yourself in the process because you work so hard. If I could have read this book in year 12, oh my god, my life would have been so much better. Like, I was Frances in year 12. So yeah, 3 of my faves, wish I could have read them. And finally, do I have any regrets about my reading during this time? Again, I just wish I could have read more widely. I wish I read more queer books. I wish I discovered Love Us YA earlier because I only started reading it like a lot of Love Us YA in uni, but it was there in high school. I just should have looked for it. And more diverse stories. I would have loved to have read more of them in high school as well. And finally, 2017 to 2019, my university years. How many books did I read? I'd say around 400 maybe. This year I read 110 for sure. Last year I read 150, and then I'd say the rest is 2017. I'm not good at math, okay? I didn't even do it in high school. As you can see, I've been gradually reading more and more books as the years go on, and I'm really happy about that. The genre that I read most during these years were, thankfully, Love Us YA, which isn't like a genre, but it's kind of a subcategory of YA, so I'm counting it, and queer books as well, same thing. Thankfully, after high school, I realized what I wanted to read and I went out and found all these amazing Love Was YA books. I started going to events and discovering authors that way, and that was amazing. And I became obsessed with queer books because I discovered who I was, and that was amazing. And I started finding books that I saw myself in, so that was really cool. Some of my favorite books of the last couple of years included A Darker Shade of Magic by Queen V, who I finally met this year. Oh my god, I freaking love her. I'm obsessed with her. I just want to move to Edinburgh and we can marry each other, and then I can pet her dog and we can drink tea and write together. Is that too much to ask? I also loved They Both Died at the End, Adam Silvera. This is another book that profoundly impacted me in first year of uni. I freaking loved it. It was just a phenomenal book that left me a sobbing mess at the end, and I'm so excited for the series. I cannot wait. Next up, Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I mentioned this one briefly before, but I finally read it in first year uni and it changed my life. It is my favorite book of all time. I can say that without hesitation. It's just incredible. I freaking love it. And next year, I'm gonna meet Alice. How wild is that to say? Like, this year I met Queen V, next year I'm meeting Alice. It's all coming up, Sarah. And next we have The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. And I actually met Mackenzie Lee this year as well. I can't believe it. But this was such a fun queer book, and I've read it like 7 to 8 times. It helps that the audiobook is so beautiful as well. And yeah, this was such a great book. But of course, there are some books that I wish I read during that time period. The first one was Scythe, which I only just read like last month, and I've almost finished reading the third book in this series, but I wish I read this book earlier. I wish I read it when it came out. I mean, I did read it when it came out, but I don't think I ever finished it because I wasn't like fully invested or I had other stuff to read, and then I just never continued it. And everyone that I knew was obsessed with it, and I just never read it until now, and it is such an incredible series. It is my favorite series that I've read all year. It's been such a long time since I've read a series that I just devoured. Read a series where all the books are out that I can just go from one to the next. So that was really great. I wish I read this earlier. Another book that I wish I read earlier was Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. I wish I could just sit down and read this book, especially before Pierre's amazing Nevernight series came out. Still haven't read this book. I'm halfway through, but I'm gonna have to start it again because I've forgotten everything. But yeah, everyone and their mums are obsessed with this series, and I've not read it yet, so I feel like I should be banned from BookTube. The one regret I have during this time period is not keeping a proper track of my Goodreads reading. I've been really good this year, but I've not been posting reviews, so like, what's even the point? And last year, I think I logged all of the books that I read because I read 149, but I'm not entirely sure. But in 2017, I didn't log anything. I think I had Goodreads, but I never used it. And I can't remember a single book that I read in 2017, so yay! So yeah, these are just some of the books that I read in the past decade. I had a pretty good reading decade. I love that I can say that now. And of course, I am just so excited to see what books come out in the next decade. I will have read like, oh my god, over 1,000 books in the next 10 years. I'm so excited. But also I'm quite stressed just thinking about that fact. That's great. If you've read any of the 600 books that I've read in the past decade, do let me know what you thought of them. If you want to go and do this tag, go ahead. I tag you. I cannot wait to watch your videos. But that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye everyone!